Hey everybody, I am LeBoeuf, Head of Business Development here at Descript. Today we're going to be talking about launching a branded podcast. Over the next 30 to 60 minutes or so, we're going to bring some guests in from our friends over at Castos who are going to explain everything you need to know about how to launch your branded podcast, how to get it distributed, how to start monetizing it, and I'll cover a little bit of Descript while we're at it. So let's, without further ado, bring in my friends Sam and Matt. Gentlemen, how are you doing this fine morning?
Doing great, Jay, and really happy to be here. Thanks for the intro. My name is Sam Chilbowski. I am our head of growth over here at Castos, and I'm also joined here by Matt. I'll let him introduce himself as well.
Hey, everybody. Matt Medeiros, Director of Podcaster Success at Castos.
Outstanding. So before we dive in and learn a little bit more about what Castos is, first, I want our audience to know that this is live. This is not pre-recorded. We do these so that way we can get you as involved as possible. So this is your time. We're here to answer your questions. First thing I want to know, do you have a podcast already? If you do, drop it into the YouTube or the Facebook live chat, depending on where you are watching this live stream. So tell us the name of your podcast, where to check it out. Feel free to shamelessly self-promote and we'll bring it up on the screen. We want to know. Now, if you don't have a podcast yet, today's a fine day to start one. Next week might be good too. So just let us know if you do not yet have a podcast and tell us what you're thinking. So drop those in the chat. We'll bring them up on the screen as they start coming in. Okay. Now, today's agenda, we're going to talk about, first of all, making a go, no-go decision on launching a branded podcast. We're going to talk about the difference between an internal and a branded podcast. We're going to talk about creating and editing your podcast in Descript very briefly, because if you're on the Descript channel, maybe you know what it is, but we'll cover that anyway. And then we'll wrap with how to take it and seamlessly export it to Castos using our new integration that we've built with Castos. So first of all, I've said the word Castos like about 1 billion times. Everybody who's watching this knows that Descript is a tool that allows you to edit audio and video as easily as editing text. And a lot of people are using that to cut down long audio recordings, video recordings, get them nice and succinct. But what's Castos? Walk me through that.
Yeah, so Castos, first and foremost, is a hosting and distribution platform. So when you are launching a podcast, putting your work out there, the podcast needs to live somewhere. You can, of course, put the podcast out through your own website's hosting, but that's typically not recommended because there's a lot more features and there's a lot more analytics and integrations you can get by going with somebody who can host the podcast specifically for you on your servers. And that's really what, at the center of what Castos does. We make it easy to get your podcast out there, to publish it across Apple, Spotify, wherever else people might get their podcasts, and really streamline that process from that initial content through the recording to the editing. So that's been something that we've been really excited about, especially through, this integration with Descript, is just shortening that time and that amount of time that it takes to get your work out there.
Awesome. So the most basic question for people, how do I get my content on Spotify, on Apple, on Google Podcasts, on Amazon? Short answer, it's Castos.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it is, and thank you for that, Jay. With setting up a podcast, I know there's some people in the chat who mentioned they hadn't yet launched their podcast. You still do need to create an account, for example, on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But once that's created, Castos allows you to really just automate the process. So you have a new episode, you're able to edit it directly in Descript with a couple clicks, publish it to Castos, which then sends it out across all of these different directory services where people will find your episodes.
Awesome. Matt, did Sam capture everything?
Yeah, he did. I think one of the most important parts to our culture at Castos is, especially for podcasters, is the ever important RSS feed. And that's the technical thing that Castos creates and manages for you. You can think of Castos as your home base for your podcast files, your episodes, your audio, and we'll help you take that feed and bring it to all of those points of distribution. And most recently, the biggest player into the game that came out most recently was Amazon. And that's one of the benefits of picking hopefully any good podcast host. Even if you don't choose Castos, you want to have a host to host your podcast and keep that RSS feed as cutting edge as possible. Every podcaster is looking to grow their audience for the most part, and distribution and being able to connect in this open environment that is RSS feeds and podcasts is very important to a lot of folks. And that's the more technical side of things that we do here at Castos.
Awesome. Well, let's actually bring in some of the podcasts that we've seen so far, people's aspirations. So thanks to Kevin on our back end, who is controlling the live chat. So we've got my friend Dave Hill Jr. It looks like Dave has something he wants to share on if he's going to bring, if he has a podcast. And Dave says, nope, not yet. There we go. It's back. His brilliant wife, way to flatter your wife on live YouTube, is wanting to start one, and so much has changed. That's the thing. It's a full-time job to keep up with this. And by using Dscript to edit, we'll keep you updated on the editing piece. And by using Castos to publish, it's their job to make sure that you're always syndicated and you have the option to go to the latest and greatest publishing platforms. Okay, who else has a podcast out there? Looks like Martha does. Different Learners Los Angeles. Awesome. Podcast on neurodiversity, advocacy, and special education. Definitely love to follow that out there. Awesome. Cool. And then awesome. So keep the comments coming and we will bring them up as we go along. All right. Next thing I want to cover. So we recently had a blog post that we published on the Descript blog.dscript.com. And part of how we described it is we talked about making an internal podcast. And so if you're a company and you're trying to think, I need to get my message out there, you might be thinking that there's a choice between making a branded podcast and making an internal podcast. Sam, can you help us break down the difference between these two terms, when each is appropriate, and help our viewers first make that decision?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jay, and happy to clarify. So, there has been a big push in the industry recently towards private podcasting. Services directories everywhere are launching their own service where you can create a private feed, whether that's for members, whether that's for employees. And that's really what we talk about when we are discussing an internal company podcast. That would be something, just for employees. Either it helps with training, it improves, employee engagement, employee happiness, helps build the culture within your organization. All of those things are examples of an internal podcast. But what we're talking about today, ultimately, is a public-facing podcast, something that you want to be seen by anyone that's going to help grow brand awareness, that's going to help people connect with you outside of your organization. I think that's oftentimes at the heart of what a branded podcast is it's a way to connect with prospective customers, users of your service in a way that isn't just, strictly an advertisement.
Great. So Descript, the company, could have an internal podcast where we're focused on best practices in audio production and video production, and we're just kind of coaching each other. Maybe we're sharing customer challenges that we're seeing, and using this to provide our community of about 60 to 70 employees well informed. But that's just going to be private for us. Maybe we could expand it to our beta users as well, open it up a little more. But the goal is it's not on the RSS feed that Matt was talking about. We would create something that would not make it to Amazon or to Spotify. Is that correct?
Yeah. So with that, it's, typically, for example, what we do at Castos is we have our mobile app for private podcasting, where basically you send somebody a link, they get access to the feed, and it's not, publicly available on any of these major directories. Now, some of these directories are making a segue into private podcasting and offering some of the same functionality. But even if it's, hosted on a different service, the key for a private podcast or an internal company podcast is that it can't just be searched and found and listened to right away. Somebody needs to be invited to that content.
Cool.
If I could just piggyback on top of that, the major benefits, of course, is it's a communications tool. It's a replacement to your Monday morning Zoom meetings, your videos, what you're doing as a company is allowing your employees to have this option to engage through audio in hopefully a much more relaxed way. We call it the step away experience. You can literally step away from your computer, go for a walk, go for a run, clean your house, right? Because so many of us are working from home. And as the employer, as the team lead, you're allowing your team to consume this information through in your favorite podcast player. If you're already listening to podcasts, I know it sounds kind of crazy, like, God, I got to listen to my work meetings through a podcast player, but it's also an option, for that flexibility. It also helps with anyone who wants to start a podcast, something that's unrelated to work, and you want to monetize a podcast. You flip the name private podcast to members only podcast, exclusive podcast, premium content podcast. And you as a podcast creator can then put up this paywall if you want, or free opt-in to get this private feed for your members. You think of the sort of Patreon model, or many of the popular podcasts are having this behind the scenes kind of look of how the content is created, or extended content. That's another play with this private RSS podcast that we have here at Castos. And you can divvy it up however you want. Use it for your company, use it for monetizing your show. Totally up to you.
Awesome. So everybody, I feel like we have a good baseline on an internal members only podcast versus a branded podcast. Let's hit us up with more questions if you have, but now let's now take it to, we're going to create a branded podcast. So I actually have an example of one that I was actually interviewed on, and this company actually uses Dscript to create it. Why not use that as an example? So this is a company called Aldis. This is a recruiting firm that specializes in AI and machine learning. And they invited me onto their branded podcast, which focuses on innovations at the intersection of AI and machine learning. So they focus on people and companies in the space. And the goal is, if they can create awareness, feature some cool stories in the space, people will start listening. They'll build a community of listeners around it. And well, it just happens to be created by a company that's doing recruiting. That's probably going to build their brand over time. And here I am actually talking about them for free on this live stream. So it is working, I guess. So let's talk a little bit about how that went. The first thing we actually did for this branded podcast, I'm going to turn my video. I turn my video feed on. Harmony turns my video. Everybody's turning my video feed on. But here it is. So what are you seeing on the screen? This is Descript. If you've never seen it before, wow, we kept you waiting 15 minutes, and I apologize for that. Descript is a desktop tool that allows you to edit audio and video as easily as editing text. So you might know this clunky thing down here that we've had for about 30 years. This is a waveform. It's a representation of sound over time. Back in ye olden days, you would have to say like, oh, I want to remove this phrase, and you have to like just kind of guesstimate what's going on in the waveform, and that doesn't make sense. So Descript really has pioneered the paradigm of linking a transcript. So I dragged in the audio file, which was an interview between myself and JP, the host of this podcast, and a transcript is created. And now any changes I make, such as, hey, here's the start of the show.
Descript. Jay, welcome to the show. Hey, JP. JP, can we ask you to repeat that? It looks like there was a countdown for the recording. So we missed the beginning of what you said.
Sure. Absolutely. Sorry.
So that's just us working our way into it. Back in the olden days, you'd have to look at the waveform, just kind of keep clicking around, figure out when to trim it. With Dscript, I can actually see that right where right where we say you're listening to AI in action, I can select the text I don't want. You see down on the very bottom of the screen, we've highlighted the waveform. I can hit the delete key. And just like that, now we can jump right back and say,
You're listening to AI in Action. I'm your host, JP Valentine. Our guest today is Jay LeBoeuf. Jay is the head of business.
And if I don't want the Jay as the head of business development at Descript, again, I can click that sentence. I'm just going to ignore it. And now we skip right over it.
Our guest today is Jay LeBoeuf. Jay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, JP. It's great to be here.
All right. So now you get the sense. Now imagine you do that. You do things like, remove filler words. So I could go through. I am a prolific and ah sayer. Unfortunately, still working on that, but I can see here's all my ums and ahs. I can go through, ignore them all, which thankfully the hosts did for me. So my interview with them sounds quite awesome. I click on apply here. We're going to start optimizing edit boundaries. We're going to start removing our filler words. And that's Descript in a nutshell, if I can only explain it in a few minutes. Basically, edit audio as easily as editing text. And I should also say edit video as easily as editing text. Some of my recommendations to a lot of podcasters, keep the video. So you might as well keep the video around. If you're going to do an interview, record the video too, because you don't know when that's going to be come in handy. And with Descript, it's really straightforward. You could bring everything around and then just export out the audio at the very end of the process. Okay, so now we have our branded podcast. Imagine we've just done our AI in action branded podcast. Now, before we had an integration with Castos, if you wanted to get it on Castos, you'd have to go to the export window. You'd say you want to export out the audio. And then you would, decide, okay, do I want to export out maybe my current composition, and I want to export it out, as a WAV file or MP3 file, and select these settings. It would render the file, mix it down, download it to your desktop, and now it's on you to find that file, re-upload it to the cloud. I think we can do it all in the cloud and save you all a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn it over to Matt, who's going to kind of take it from here. He's going to take us from Descript into Castos and show us some of the features along the way.
Sounds great. So first, what I have to say is, listen, I've been podcasting now for 8 years. In those olden days of going through the waveform, oh man, it was a struggle. And I will say that as soon as I found Descript, I'm a full disclosure. I'm also a Descript customer. Love it. Use it every day. Use it for all the podcasts that I produce. And I immediately canceled my audio editing app tool that I used, which I won't say the name of, but it starts with aw and ends with dition. And I immediately threw it out the window as soon as I found Descript, because it's a fantastic tool, and I recommend it to everybody to edit their podcasts with. I'm going to pull up Castos. Do I have to share my screen, or will somebody else pull it? There it is.
Look at that magic.
So I'll pull up Castos. I'll briefly talk about some of the things that we mentioned about the branded podcast stuff, or just podcasting stuff at large. Here we are in the Castos dashboard. This is the overview of all of my podcasts. No matter which plan you're on at Castos, you can host unlimited podcasts. That's individual podcasts. If you have a show about baseball, if you have a cooking show, if you have a show about Descript, if you have a private podcast, you can host as many of those siloed shows as you want, with as many episodes as you want in each respective podcasts. And this is the dashboard. This is just showing the most recent 3. I have 2 public podcasts and a private podcast here. If I click into Podcast Lab by Castos, you can see a bunch of test episodes. This is where we'll publish our episode from Dscript today. And I just can go through these and edit these as I see fit. Or as we were mentioning in the old way of doing it before, which was always a sort of thorn in my side, is I had to export from Descript, come into Castos, and start all of the editing here. I'd have to put in new show title, put in my description. See, I say description. It has me saying description. And I have to put in my description here, media file, and upload everything manually. But what we'll see with Descript is I'll do that all automatically. When we go into, this is just a touch on what we were referencing before in the distribution section. This is the ever important RSS feed, and that's largely what Castos is going to help you send out to the world. Once you create your podcast here, you upload your show artwork, you upload a description, you pick which categories you want your podcast to be associated with in your distribution points, like Apple, Spotify, iTunes, Podchaser, stuff like that. Will help you distribute that RSS feed to any of those points. One-click integration with Spotify and Amazon Music. So it makes your life a lot easier there, so folks can find you. And then on the private subscribers side of things, you have this overview of, this is just a test account, so not much information here.
You're killing it, Matt. 1 subscriber, killing it.
Yeah, I'm rich. If you're selling your private podcast here, you'd see all of your members here. Or if you're a company, you'd have an overview of where all of your employees are listening to. And you can send them the links and access to the private podcast. Okay, so 50,000 foot view in a nutshell overview of Castos. But how do I get an episode into Podcast Lab? Switch over to Descript. Pick one of my podcasts, one that's a little bit easier to upload. So I'll go into an episode. I don't think I've published this one through Descript yet, so this should be a safe one. It's actually going to download the files here. And the first thing we'll need to do is publish this. Oh, actually, I've already done it here, right? So let me back out to another one just so I can start from scratch. I thought that was a safe one. Let's go all the way back to June 9th. So the first thing we'll need to do inside of Descript is publish the episode to a Descript page. I'm not a developer, but how the developers have told me on both the Descript side and the Castos side is publishing this page is what's going to allow us to make that connection to Castos. So I guess you might be worrying, well, maybe I don't want to publish this to a Descript page. Maybe somebody can access it if they have the link or whatever. You can always switch it to an unlisted link. So people have to at least know the link to view that page. So I'll go ahead and publish that. And that'll publish this page to Descript, and we'll just close that for now. So once it's published there, we'll click on Share, Export. And like we mentioned in the past, you'd have to download it to audio. Now we'll just click on the More tab, go down to Castos. And what this will do is prompt us to import into your Castos account. You have to be logged into your Castos account, or it'll prompt you to log into your Castos account when you do that, but just be logged into your Castos account. And you'll see I have many shows here. So it will say, hey, which show do you want to go to? In this case, I want to go to Podcast Lab by Castos. I can change the name. That's live demo. And then import the episode. And while that's churning away in the background, it's importing into Descript. It's downloading the audio file to Descript, to Castos, excuse me. It'll say, hey, the import is complete. We'll hit close. You can see here's Matt's live demo now in my library of podcast episodes. I click on edit. I can, again, change the title, add to the description, and I did get confirmation seconds ago before we went live that the tool has actually been completed very recently, I guess within the last 48 hours, where it's pulling in that transcript from Dscript into our transcript section of the podcast. So all of that heavy lifting is done for you. Not only is the episode imported, the actual file is imported into Castos, the Dscript transcript that you worked on and cleaned up has been imported as well. And if you want to add any show notes to the episode, sometimes people put show note links or they put call to actions, a brief summary of the show, stuff that appears in the podcast apps, the podcast players will all show up here, and you can link that stuff out. Very important for those of you who are looking to grow an audience or to upsell content in your podcast, to really spend some critical thinking in this area. Give the listener some details, give them some links to click on. And then you'd largely go through, if you were fine-tuning it for SEO, keywords, if this was part of a series, what series is it, episode numbers, episode type. Mostly it's a full episode for most people. Obviously, it's associated to the same podcast. And if you had a specific image to upload artwork for that episode, you could select that there. Schedule your episode to go live whenever, or simply hit publish, and that'll publish it out to your listeners. That'll go out to your RSS feed, and people will consume it through any podcast app or directory on the web. That's the quick integration from a Descript to Castos.
So pointing out some of the magic that was actually going on there. So that publish step that you had mentioned, Matt, what that's actually doing when you were in Descript and you press the publish button, that is basically rendering this entire project in the cloud. And what's super cool about that, you can see that, behind the scenes, we created a playable web page. So this is not only just, it looks like the transcript, but you see there's a player on the bottom. You can actually play this web page. It's going to play the audio. It's going to synchronize it to the text on the screen. And if, the transcript just kind of comes for free with Descript. It's the way of editing. So as you have this transcript and as you are going through and actually improving your transcript and using maybe our transcript correction wizard and really making it more accurate, that's not just work that you're doing to make your editing process better. That's actually going to flow into the final destination. And so Castos is going to get that uploaded. Matt said automatically. I like to think it's more auto-magically now. So it's just gonna copy over. While we are touching on this, Matt or Sam, can either of you talk about what's the benefit to having the transcript? What does Castos do with it?
So right now, there's a few places where it'll show up. So the benefit of transcripts, obviously, number one, accessibility. Anybody who is hearing impaired or use screen readers, transcripts is obviously a must-have for that scenario. Transcripts also provide value for search engine optimization, so SEO. You're talking about a particular topic. That topic is getting rendered into words. Words is getting indexed by Google and other search engines that are out there. So there's that particular advantage. But if you're a fanatical podcast listener like I am, sometimes you don't have time to take notes. You're out for a run, you're exercising, you're doing something, and the transcript will allow you to quickly go back and, what was that thing that they mentioned? What was that website that they mentioned? And you want to be able to reference it. It's also a useful tool for your listener. It's not just those other two cases. So right now, Castos will allow you to store that and have somebody access that right through Castos. We also have basic website pages that are available for podcasters here at Castos. I don't know if I have it enabled in this test site. Yeah, I do. So if you don't have a website and you want to start a podcast, we provide a free basic website to our podcast customers. They can access the transcript there. And upcoming very shortly, those of you that are familiar with podcasting and are following the Podcast 2.0 namespace, just kind of getting technical here, new podcast apps will start to have transcripts downloaded directly into their app. So we're preparing for that as well. So
Awesome.
many use cases for transcripts.
Awesome. So really I take that as a call to action. If you're using Dscript, which, come on, at this point, you just have to be using Dscript for your podcast editing.
You have to. It's like the wine and cheese combination.
Yeah, like
can't have it.
You can have cheese,
but you have to have wine.
Never mind. Just. And if you're discovering wine for the first time in your life, please let us know in the comments. Love to hear from you and talk to you about that as well. Any recommendations you have, that's also welcome too. But you're going to be doing your podcast editing with Descript, and you're going to have this AI generated transcript. It's going to be 95% accurate. You're going to use some of the transcript correction tools. So we have some simple single key shortcuts to help you correct things. We have a transcript correction wizard. Then when you need to get that online, you need to get that distributed to your podcast hosts. That's going to be the Castos integration, where it's going to take the audio file, it's going to take the transcript. Really, it's also going to prevent errors. You're not going to accidentally upload the one that should have been like final _ really final. No, whatever you publish from Descript is just going to make its way up there.
Yeah.
So
I do a transcript. I do a transcripted podcast. So I do a scripted podcast. And
is it about transcripts?
No, it should be though. And one of the biggest benefits using Descript is that I can read through the script, and you're never going to get the script perfect 100% the first take, but it's okay to make errors when you're reading the script. And I guess same for video when you're using Descript, because I can quickly just find those errors. Whereas in the past, if I was working just off of the waveform and I was erroring when I was reading the script, I had to stop, cut it out, or find it again. And then sometimes it gets shipped into the final production podcast because you totally missed it. But with Descript, it's okay to stop, restart, because you can literally see the words stop, restart, or you can see the duplicate errors that you've made. So it helps your recording workflow too.
Absolutely. What's funny you mentioned that, Matt, is in what I was just screen sharing on my screen, the host has gotten into a workflow where he'll say, I think he says like, let me try that again. And that's his catchphrase. And so you can just search through the transcript in Descript for, let me try that again, or try that again. And he jumps through, and immediately when we're done recording an episode, looks for all the try that again, finds the paragraph before that, delete that right away. So as soon as you're, in this case, I think we actually recorded it. We recorded it with Riverside FM. So everybody had a nice clean feed. We also had the video as well. We brought those into Descript and then immediately removed the stuff that was try that again, because we knew those were bad takes, and just got rid of them.
And think about how much more difficult that would be if you were just looking for the waveform that you thought reflected try this again, nearly impossible. So it's amazing.
Totally. So I love it. We've just walked through the process. Sam, you used the phrase nearly impossible. For a lot of people watching, maybe you have a handful of views, and for them, nearly impossible means just getting an audience behind your branded podcast. I know you would put together some tips on what people should have in mind as they are deciding they want to build a branded podcast. Do you mind walking through a few things? At this point, people feel comfortable with editing. They feel comfortable with pressing the big publishing button. But then what? What else should they be holding in mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the consideration to start a branded podcast, should be something that you really map out and you plan well, because, ultimately the content included and what that podcast is talking about is going to be most important if it's going to be effective. There's this great quote, one that we actually included in our in one of our recent blog posts about branded podcasts, from Lex Friedman, the CEO of Midroll. And he says, about branded podcasts, no one wants to listen to a 10-episode podcast about how great, ZipRecruiter is at finding a job or helping the right applicant. But if we create a show with someone like an entrepreneur about what it means to be successful and being the most productive person around, that's going to appeal to exactly the kind of people that ZipRecruiter wants to reach. So if you can take that knowledge and kind of distill it into a idea for your own branded podcast, that's always going to be, what's most effective. Because with a branded podcast, the big consideration for that is brand awareness and generating new engagement with maybe a section of your potential buyers or your potential users that might not have been interacting with traditional advertising, whether it be, pay-per-click campaigns, whether it be, things like print ads. A branded podcast is going to reach typically a different segment of people. And one of the great advantages of a branded podcast and podcasts in general is the action that listeners take for that. So NPR discovered 75% of podcast listeners at one point have taken action to a sponsored message on an episode. But that sort of engagement is only going to happen if the content comes first. So, when you're starting a branded podcast, first, think about what the content is. You don't want your show to be a 30-minute, an hour-long ad for your services. You want it to be, something that, maybe parts of it tie back to, what you do or, what product you are selling, but that should never come first. A great example of that is, the Trader Joe's podcast, the Inside Trader Joe's, that gives people a behind the scenes look at, the store history, employees, operations. That kind of perfectly toes the line between almost an advertisement, but not quite, because there's so many, avid fans of Trader Joe's out there that they're going to want to listen to this. They want this insider take. So think about that. And also think about, your brand's mission. If you have something that is very central to your mission, which I hope you do if you are, a small startup or a large organization, something that you can distill into kind of that 15-second elevator pitch. Think about that. Think about that brand mission and think about how your podcast content might flow up to this. To reiterate, sell yourself, but not too much. This goes back to thinking about, your brand's mission and what the content is going to be about. It's okay to have maybe an ad or, saying that you are sponsored or that, the podcast is produced by your organization. Maybe you offer a discount or something like that, but leave that for the end. Make it in the background. The content should always come first. And that's really where you're going to see the most success. My final tip for starting a branded podcast is, reuse that content. Fold your podcast into other marketing initiatives, because a podcast is a phenomenal jumping off point for all of the other marketing channels. That's why, with these tools that we're talking about, Castos, Dscript, having that transcription generated for you in a format that looks amazing enables you to write things like show notes to include in a blog post, enables you to have this great sort of repository of content to put out in a newsletter, things like that. Think about how you can repurpose this podcast and how you are going to get, engagement and listenership outside of just, putting it out on all of these directories and hoping it gets found. Have intentions before going in about how you're going to repurpose this. So those are really, my main tips for starting a branded podcast. I think it's an overused phrase within, the podcasting space or just creators in general. But, if you build it, they will come. If you are putting out great work, if you are thinking about the content, you're thinking about what your audience wants to listen to and what they're going to engage with, the more effective that this is going to be as a marketing channel. And the better, ROI you're going to get from this in this time and monetary investment, even if podcasting might be a little bit of a longer tail approach. If you're consistent with it, if the content is good, people are going to pay attention.
Awesome. Yeah, think of it as, I like your point, especially on thinking of it as a holistic part of your content marketing strategy. So in a similar way of like, you're not just going to do a blog and then not do some social media to exert out some of the best, most salient parts of the blog. This is part of the whole bigger picture.
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
Awesome.
it's thinking about your channels kind of across the board and thinking about where you can repurpose things and where, how you're going to be able to get the most exposure to your audience. So
Awesome. Awesome. Matt, I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you said you're an avid podcast listener. You have some favorite branded podcasts that we could use as a North Star?
Oh man, that's a great question. So, well, the first thing I'll just have to pitch our own first. Three Clips.
Excellent. Excellent.
Threeclipspodcast.com. We've actually interviewed. So our host Jay Acunzo has interviewed a whole array of folks who do branded podcasts. Trader Joe's podcast as one of them. So anything out of that catalog is fantastic.
So you're saying it's a branded podcast about branded podcasts?
Yeah, so it's anybody who's a podcaster who wants to take their podcast to the real next level. He breaks down. It's the famous Three Clips. The premise is he will take 3 clips from some of the most popular and well crafted shows and break those down with the host. And it's a fantastic way to learn how to become a better interviewer, a better producer, a better storyteller. And he's talked to some of the great podcasts that are out there. Personally, though, I don't have a branded podcast that I listen to. Probably the one that I will listen to is, I think, Andreessen Horowitz is coming out with one called Future, which I think I'll probably listen to. But Recode Decode, Vox Media, probably the closest I would get to a branded podcast that's on my playlist.
Awesome. Sam, quick hits. You mentioned the Trader Joe's podcast. What else would you recommend for people looking for a good North Star?
Yeah, I would say, and my favorite podcast like that I listen to, there's some great examples about branded podcasts that I don't necessarily, listen to, or their limited runs. The Sauce by McDonald's was a really interesting one. A limited time series, but it talked all about the Szechuan sauce that they produce. If anybody out there has seen Rick and Morty, it talks all about this sort of global shortage of their sauce, which was an interesting one. Ones that, I don't think are traditional branded podcasts, but I'm sure people have listened to. And this is really to illustrate kind of the effect of podcasting. So, 3 years ago, started listening to the Daily podcast by the New York Times. 2 months after listening to that, I'm subscribed to the New York Times. So you can see that interaction, how I was able to listen to this podcast for free, and then I subscribed to the New York Times. More recently was the Wall Street Journal. 2 years ago, I had never read the Wall Street Journal. I had never paid attention to any articles, anything coming out in the Wall Street Journal. Listened to their podcast, The Journal, for 2 months, instantly subscribed. And I think that there's a lot of examples like that fall outside of maybe traditional journalism or broadcasting. But I give those 2 examples just to really illustrate how powerful that is. Seeing somebody else's content in a different medium, one that I was familiar with, that I really enjoyed, and I was seeking out new podcasts, and then instantly going to their other more traditional channels. I think it just kind of helps illustrate the power of a branded podcast.
Awesome. I have something, if Kevin wants to bring up a comment that I just saw from Big Blue about a content marketing idea. So if you're making a series, presumably a branded podcast series, look into repurposing it as an ebook and an audiobook. You guys want to talk about that? What do you think about this idea?
I think you should do everything you can possibly do to support and extend, your podcast. You have to, people ask all the time is what social media channels we should be. Should we do an email? Should we do a blog? Should we do an ebook? The answer is yes to every single one of them. It's unfortunately, though, people just don't have the time to do, especially if you're an independent indie podcast producer, to do all of them. But you should do all of them to the extent of your capabilities. One of the first questions that I ask when folks start up at Castos is if they're really struggling with getting a podcast off the ground, is, well, how many episodes do you think you can do every month? And then they say, generally, the answer is, I want to do 1 a week. I said, that's great. It's a super ambitious goal. Once you do 1 episode a week, because on average, and Dscript helps bring down the time of editing for sure. On average, you're looking at like 4 to 6, maybe 8 hours to produce a single episode of an hour-long episode if you're putting some care into it. And they'll say, well, once I do these 4 episodes, that's all I can do. Like I don't even have time to make a blog post about it or do an ebook about it. So I say cut that in half. If you can just focus on 2 episodes a month and then spend the other 50% of your time promoting and creating other content marketing efforts around it, you're going to be so better off in the long run, because you have to promote, you have to get out there, and you have to do whatever it is that you can do to get this show seen by a new potential audience, especially if you're coming into the game without an audience. And this is a brand new thing for you, and you don't have a YouTube following, you don't have a Twitter following, you're not popular on LinkedIn, that's a thing, and that you need to do whatever you can do. One thing that Dscript, well, one of many things that Dscript does really well is the audiograms, right? Creating those videos out of audio that I love to use is a fantastic way to grow listenership to your podcast, because you're taking what's audio, what's generally has to be listened to on your mobile device, and you're making a video out of it, and it's a 15 to 30 second clip that really punches into an exciting moment of a podcast episode. Is a great way to expose your podcast to new listeners, right? They're scrolling through Twitter, they see the awesome little audiogram, waveform animation bouncing up and down, they see somebody's photo or the logo of your podcast. Oh, what's this? Right? And they can click into it, listen to it, go, wow, that's exciting. And it's just giving yourself another opportunity to find a listener. So ebooks, audiograms, blog posts, newsletters, Twitter tweets, everything that you can do.
Matt, I gotta show that while you're talking about it, because thank you, Big Blue, for bringing this up. Not to keep emphasizing the transcript as the source of truth so much, but obviously put a ton of effort into thinking of the story and choosing, you should spend a lot of time. Don't just wing your podcast or just bring people on and just figure out what you're going to talk about on the fly. Do the planning. Once you get it, now you have this amazing moment captured. Start curating some great highlights, some tips and tricks. What Matt was just mentioning was the audiograms. So I've selected this sentence here. I have some slight edits, but those won't be reflected. And then I could either click on the share button or my favorite keyboard command K on Mac, Control K on Windows, and just start typing what you want to do. I want to create an audiogram. So now that I bring this up, you've definitely seen these on social media. You've wondered, how are people getting them out there so fast? Descript provides built-in audiogram support. So you can select from a couple of different templates with your impactful quote. This is going to embed the audio and create this video for you. You can include the composition title, the speaker label of who's speaking. You can change the accent color for the text, or you can include a background image. So if I have my show cover art, all I have to do is, choose this. In this case, here's our webinar template. Very poor selection there, Jay, because it's text upon text. So I'm just going to remove this and, call it a day. So you can, choose to tint the background, do anything else you want to do, hit publish, and then that's now on social media. So that's something that you definitely should consider doing, creating these rich audiograms, again, because you've corrected the transcript. And the other thing for Big Blue, who's talking about, repurposing this as an ebook and a short book with Amazon, sure, go to export, file, text, export it as a Word doc or an RTF. You can choose if you want to include timestamps, if you want word markers. If not, it's going to look basically exactly like what it does on the screen. So that's something that we do. If we're going to take this live stream that we're doing right now, and if I wanted to create some blog highlights out of this, I would actually send this transcript. So I would take the MP4 file of this restream that we're doing right now. I would drag that into Descript, generate a transcript, and send that transcript to our content marketer, where he would then pull some text from it. All right. Covering a lot of ground. Last call, if you have questions for our experts from podcast experts, our experts from Castos, hit us up at any time. A few quick calls to action while we're waiting for final questions and comments to trickle in. If you have any help requests for Dscript, if you want to learn more about how the integration works, how publishing works, how to correct your transcript, go to help.dscript.com. Not only do we have a lot of great resources on there for you to look at, but you can engage in live chat support with our support team anytime between 8 and 5 Pacific time. There's live chat. You'll get answers in seconds, fractions of seconds. You can also submit a support request, and we'll get back to you within an hour or two, again, during normal business hours. We also invite you to join our Discord community. So we have a Discord community set up, discord.dscript.com. We got thousands of people there who are not only engaging in best practices, tips, and tricks, but also sharing their work, getting other people to listen to their creations, and really just kind of becoming an active part of the community. Last thing I want to talk about as well, if you've seen some stuff, you are a podcaster, you're like, today's the day that I want to start publishing. I've been noodling in Descript for a while. I got to get my work out there. Sam, is there a way that they could take advantage of Castos promotion, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are doing a special discount for this live stream. All you have to do is head to go.castos.com/discount. So go.castos.com/discount. Just enter in your email. We'll send you a coupon code for 50% off 3 months of any package. So if you want to be on the base package, if you want to be on the highest package, any of those options, 50% off for your first 3 months. And we would love to have you, try out our service. So
awesome. Matt, Sam, any closing words as we bring our short time to an end? Sam, you want to go first? Anything you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just, and this goes for anybody out there who's creating, whether it's for a branded podcast, whether it's for a, internal company podcast, or just, something you're personally passionate about. Start creating, start drafting ideas, get into Dscript and try out recording and just see how it goes. With practice, the content will come. It's about consistency. It's about taking that first leap. And I just encourage everybody, if, you're thinking about, starting a podcast, dive in. And there's a lot of great resources out there that are totally free for you to use. The Descript blog is a great place. We put out a lot of content on the Castos blog as well. So yeah, we just encourage you to check that out if you are getting started. Otherwise, start creating.
Matt, what do you have for us?
Listen, everything should be a podcast, right? It is in my eyes, everything can and should be a podcast. It's a fantastic way to connect intimately with an audience. A lot easier than you think. Again, thanks to the team at Descript for helping making audio editing so much easier and really starting up a podcast. Although it looks technical from the outside and you're like, Apple, Spotify, where does this go? How do I house it all? We can make it easy for you here at Castos. Like Sam said, you jump in, you start doing it. The question isn't, a lot of folks get hung up on, am I going to have anybody listening to this? That's not the question. The question is what are you going to do with this audience once it appears? Because it will eventually appear from hard work and perseverance. You will get an audience. It might be just, your mom at the beginning, but at month 6, you'll have hundreds of people listening to you if you don't give up on your podcast. So if that's you, check us out at Castos.
Fantastic. And everybody, for those who've been wondering who that one private subscriber was to Matt's feed earlier, we've now uncovered who it is.
Now you know.
Now you know. Excellent.
Matt has the private podcast instead of calling his mom. She just listens.
Yeah. I'd say, Mom, I don't even want to talk. It's just a podcast. That's what you do.
Outstanding. Well, and you have the transcript available too, so she can just kind of speed through it as well. I love that. Sam, Matt, thank you so much. Thank you to the wonderful team at Castos for making a wonderful product and building this integration to make all of our podcast lives just a little bit easier.
Amazing. And thank you for having us on, Jay. It's been great.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Lots of love to go around. Thanks for all of your comments. lots of calls to action today, but definitely make sure to check out Castos. Get started with your 50% off your 3 months. And if you have questions on Descript, join us on the Help Center where we'll be hanging out on the live chat. Bye all.